This article, written by Katie Lizaeade, first appeared on Book Bub. If you're intimidated by poetry, I don't blame you. It can be hard to follow the strict rules of form while also expressing yourself to the fullest. If you're thinking about writing poetry but don't know where to begin and are feeling a little shy, I've compiled a list of different types of poetry to get you started. Included are a few well-known forms, such as sonnets, as well as a couple of newer forms that you might not have encountered, along with examples of each of the different types of poetry. The great thing about poetry is that you can play with it. If you struggle with one form, feel free to set it aside and try another. And don't be afraid of those rules. As a mentor once told me, it's important to know the rules so that you can break them in interesting ways. 1. Acrostic. You might have encountered the acrostic poem in school. Also called named poems, acrostic poems spell out a name, word, or phrase, with each letter beginning each new line of your poem. Want to challenge yourself? See if you can write an acrostic poem where the final letters of the poem also spell out a word or message. Several notable authors have written acrostic poems, including Lewis Carroll and Edgar Allan Poe. I've included the full text of Poe's acrostic, which begins with the same name that it spells, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, it is in vain you say. Love not, thou sayest it in so sweet a way. In vain those words from thee or Eliel Xantip's talents had enforced so well. Ah! If that language from thy heart arise, breath it less gently forth, and veil thine eyes. Endymion, recollect, when Luna tried to cure his love, was cured of all beside his philia, pride, and passion, for he died. 2. Haiku. The haiku is a type of Japanese poetry that is derived from the longer renga form. You might have encountered haikus in the following format: 3 unrhymed lines of poetry in which the first and third lines have 5 syllables, and the second has 7. The brevity and immediacy of the haiku make it one of the most well-loved forms today, and it lends itself to specific, isolated images, moods, and instances. For a masterful use of the haiku, I recommend reading Chinaka Haja's Small Poems for Big, which is a series of 24 haikus in memory of Notorious B.I.G. or Langston Hughes' Suicide's Note, which is a beautiful, heartbreaking haiku. You'll be amazed what just 3 lines can make you feel. 3. Ode. The ode is one of the oldest types of poems there is, and it's also very straightforward. Any poem written in praise of something or someone can be an ode. You could write an ode to the ocean, an ode to your pet, an ode to your good friend, favorite shoes, or a delicious snack. Contemporary poet Kevin Young has written many odes, including this poem in praise of the Midwest. A really great ode can change the way you think about something you tend to take for granted, like Angel Nafisa's Ode to Shea Butter, or shift your perspective on something painful, George Abraham's Ode to My Swollen, Mono-Infected Spleen does this well, or finally, just let you revel in a specific type of nostalgia, see Jose Olivares' Ode to Cheese Fries. 4. Sonnet. The sonnet originated in Italy and derives its name from the Italian word sonetto, which literally means little sound or little song. There are many different types of sonnets, but the form I'm going to focus on here is the one I learned first, the English sonnet, also known as the Shakespearean sonnet. The English sonnet is a single stanza, with 14 lines that consist of 3 quatrains, 4 rhyming lines, and a final rhyming couplet. Traditionally, each line of this sonnet should be written in iambic pentameter. For a great definition and breakdown of iambic pentameter, click here. Finally, the rhyme scheme for each line is as follows: Abab Kefaf. If you've dealt in sonnets before, then you might already be familiar with some of Shakespeare's sonnets. I'd like to offer Claude McKay's Sonnet America as a modern example of the sonnet form at work. Once you get really comfortable with the sonnet, you can experiment with the sonnet crown, which is made up of 15 sonnets linked by the repetition of the final line of one sonnet as the initial line of the next, and the final line of that sonnet as the initial line of the previous. The last sonnet consists of all the repeated lines of the previous 14 sonnets, in the same order in which they appeared. Marilyn Nelson's A Wreath for Emmett Till is a powerful, heart-rending series of sonnets about the murder of Emmett Till, and you can read an excerpt of it here. 5. Pantoum. The pantoum started as a Malaysian folk poem and grew and changed as it was adapted by Western writers. This type of poem can be as long or short as you like, and is composed of 3 4-line stanzas, where the second and fourth lines of each stanza become the first and third lines of the next stanza. Often, the last line of the pantoum is the same as the first line of the poem. Don't feel trapped by the repetition of the pantoum. You can shift meaning in interesting ways just by changing the punctuation of the same sentence. For examples, see Parents Pantoum by Carolyn Kaiser and Natalie Diaz's My Brother at 3 a.m. 6. Villanelle. The villanelle is a French verse form that is made up of 5 3-line stanzas and a final quatrain. The first and third lines of the first stanza repeat alternately in the following stanzas, and the 2 repeated lines form the final couplet in the quatrain. Put another way, the first line of your poem will also be the third line of your second and fourth stanzas, in addition to being the second to last line of your poem. The third line of your poem will also be the third line of your third and fifth stanzas, as well as the last line of the entire poem. It's possible you've encountered a villanelle before and haven't realized it. Dylan Thomas's Do Not Go Gentle Into the Good Night is a famous villanelle that takes on the subjects of premature death and grief, among other things. Similarly, Elizabeth Bishop's One Art is about coming to grips with the nature of loss. 7. Ekphrastic. An ekphrastic poem is actually not a form poem, it's just a term for any poem that takes a visual image or work of art as its inspiration. I often turn to the ekphrastic because it's the sort of poem that almost requires the poet to revel in the little details. When writing an ekphrastic poem, you might find it helpful to write down everything you observe about the artwork itself, the expressions on faces, the texture of the paint or marble, and then start thinking about the way those details impact you or make you feel. You could also imagine the artist, the time and place when the art was created, and more. Chinese poet and photographer Liu Xiao's poem Empty Chairs takes its inspiration from paintings by Vincent van Gogh, pictured above, and Diane Seuss's self-portrait with Sylvia Plath's Braid is a great example of how ekphrastic poems can be a lens to view an artist, an object, and yourself all at once. In addition, Angel Nafis's Ghazal for Becoming Your Own Country is an ekphrastic poem written in the ghazal form. 8. Ghazal. The ghazal is an Arabic form of verse poem that was adopted by medieval Persian poets like Hafez and Rumi, but has been written in many languages, including Hindi, Pashto, Turkish, and Hebrew. Often associated with love, both requited and unrequited, the form consists of a series of no fewer than 5 syntactically and grammatically complete couplets where both lines of the first couplet end in the same word, and second line of each following couplet also ends on that word. Traditionally, the final couplet included a proper name, usually the poet's, though not always. For 2 different takes on the ghazal, I recommend Agha Shahid Ali's Even the Rain and Patricia Smith's Hip Hop Ghazal. Zaina Hashim Beck's Broken Ghazal, Speak Arabic breaks one of the rules of the ghazal form. Her first couplet doesn't end with the same word twice, but the poem's subject, a struggle with language, reflects this departure from form in a really beautiful way. 9. Duplex. A subversion of the sonnet that takes cues from the ghazal, the duplex was invented by poet Jericho Brown. Of writing in form, he says, I write in forms because formal work helps to push me toward saying what I couldn't imagine I would say in poems. The poem is 14 lines, separated into couplets. The last line or words of each couplet becomes the first line, or part of the first line, of the following couplet, and the very first line of the poem should also be present as the last line of the poem. Jericho Brown called the form a duplex because something about its repetition and its couplets made me feel like it was a house with 2 addresses. You can read 2 of his duplex poems and more about his process in this feature from the Poetry Foundation. 10. Golden Shovel. The golden shovel is a more recent form invented by poet Terence Hayes, as in homage to the poet Gwendolyn Brooks. The last words of each line in a golden shovel poem should, if read from top to bottom, be words from a line or poem written by Gwendolyn Brooks. For example, a poet using Brooks's poem We Real Cool as inspiration for this form should end their first line with we, end their second line with real, and end their third line with cool and so on. Showing is easier than telling for this form, so if you're curious about trying your hand at this type of poem, I'd suggest taking a look at Terence Hayes' The Golden Shovel, which is written in 2 parts. I hope this list empowers you to try writing a poem or 2 in your spare time. Once you get familiar with some of the types of poems listed above, you can always try your hand at inventing new types of poetry. I'm grateful to the many poets whose work I included here, and to the poets who helped when I reached out to them about compiling this list. I wasn't able to include all the different types of poetry here, but there are many sites and publications online dedicated to poetry in all shapes and forms. I've also put together a short reading list of poetry books you might enjoy. Happy reading and writing. This article, written by Katie Lizaeade, first appeared on BookBub.